afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Saffron Software Solutions. We are really glad you're here and looking forward to a great hour and a great presentation on the new standard in schedule risk analysis and the release of Saffron Risk 1.5. As I mentioned, we've got a great crowd here today and great presenters, and we're really looking forward to it. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Just wanted to mention that if you do have questions, which we definitely encourage, please submit those via the question panel here in GoToWebinar. And if you do have any trouble, feel free to reach out to us via the GoToWebinar chat window as well. We have a distinguished panel today headed by Lars Eliasson, the CEO of Saffron Software Solutions, and Wes Gillette, the Director of Client Services. And so without any further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Lars.
Thanks, Doug. Hello, everyone. My name is Lars Eliasson. I'm the CEO of Saffron. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on Saffron Risk. It's great to see so many of you attend today. We have a record attendance from actually North and South America, from Brazil to Canada. So really great to have so many people here. In today's agenda, we're going to cover a little bit of background on Saffron, the company, as well as Saffron Risk, the product. Plus, we're going to go into a in-depth demonstration and show the product to you. And then at the end, we'll do a summary and a Q&A. So moving on, a few words about Saffron, the company. Saffron has provided project management software solutions for about 20 years. We have thousands of users leveraging our tools on some of the most complex projects in the world in verticals such as oil and gas, aerospace and defense, engineering and construction, and a few more. And a key differentiator here at Saffron is our focus on complex projects in asset-intensive industries. We have two product lines that we feature. The first one is Saffron Project, which is a project control suite for planning, scheduling, and executing large, complex projects. And then we have today's topic, which is Saffron Risk, which is a quantitative project risk analysis tool. So on this slide, you may recognize your own company. We have a few people attending from various companies on this slide. But as you can see, we have companies across all sizes, across the asset-intensive space. And we deliver solutions to the owner-operator level, contractor level, consultants, engineering companies, and so forth. Our customers use Saffron to manage some of the largest projects in the world, like turnarounds or capital projects or operational planning. So let's get to the main topic of the day, which is Saffron Risk and the release of version 1.5. A little bit of background about the product. I mentioned we've been in the project control space for about 20 years, particularly in the planning and scheduling part of it. And a few years ago, we developed a basic schedule risk module in our Saffron Project tool, and that really inspired us to take it all the way to a professional quantitative risk analysis tool, which is what you know as Saffron Risk today. And to develop Saffron Risk, we aligned with some industry experts that were helpful in getting us positioned properly in terms of product specification and the market. And we were fortunate enough to hire some of the some of the original PertMaster developers that are now the core team for Saffron Risk development. The first commercial version of Saffron Risk came out about 6 months ago. Since then, the product has matured and is now in version 1.5. The key themes for Saffron Risk is the three on the slide here. First one is powerful yet user-friendly. The second one is the notion of project risk intelligence, which is gaining better insights into project risks through innovative reporting and analysis. And then the last one, innovative risk calendars. We've taken an innovative approach to risk calendars, which is typically used for weather modeling. So a bit more detail on these. Going to the first one, powerful yet user-friendly. Our focus has been to create a tool that is easier to use than similar tools on the market, but not simplified. The user interface was designed to be intuitive and process-led based on years of learning from industry experts. We've also included powerful features for robust simulation, scenario planning, and reporting capabilities, as well as having a full-featured scheduler as part of Saffron Risk, which is actually the Saffron Project scheduler that we've incorporated. Finally, we have also P6 and Microsoft Project interoperability. So what's the benefits of this? The benefits, we see in the industry today, a lot of companies are only doing schedule risk analysis on large projects and infrequently, maybe on project milestones, for example. We think there's a big benefit to doing risk analysis, schedule risk analysis more often. And by employing tools such as Saffron Risk, we hope to improve planning quality by doing SRA more often throughout the project lifecycle and all sizes of projects. So on project risk intelligence, that's a concept we've been working on since the beginning of the Saffron Risk development. As a risk professional, you're accustomed to finding standard reports like risk distribution histograms and tornado charts in these type of software solutions, but additionally we have developed innovative reports that provide better insight into risk impacts. And there's two examples on the screen here. On the top right-hand side, you'll see a distribution S-curve comparison analysis, which helps project teams visualize alternative scenarios. And then we have an automated sensitivity analysis, which provides calculation of risk impacts in days and dollars at specific confidence levels. Wes is going to show you both of these here in a few minutes. So moving on, new in version 1.5 is risk calendars, and we've taken an innovative approach to how we do risk calendars. We actually do it the traditional way that you've seen in some other software packages, plus we have introduced a new way of doing it. And as you know, risk calendars is often used to model weather risk. And in traditional risk models, weighting on weather has typically been simulated by generating non-working periods based on aggregated statistics from underlying time series data. In Saffron Risk, the same time series data is used as direct input to the model. This replicates complicated autocorrelation patterns and seasonal variations in a way that's never been possible before. So what does this mean to you as a risk professional? Well, the time series approach in Saffron Risk significantly improves the realism in cost and schedule risk assessments where weather uncertainty is an important driver, both within the oil and gas industry and elsewhere. And again, we'll show you this here in a few minutes. So without further ado, we're going to switch gears here and take a look at the product. We're going to show you an oil and gas example here today, which includes the weather modeling piece. But I want to make it very clear that Saffron Risk is designed to work with any project in any vertical, including, for example, engineering and construction or aerospace and defense. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Wes.
Thanks, Lars. What I thought I'd do is kind of, as we walk through kind of the new features of Saffron 1.5, and not only those features, but also kind of the existing feature set that we've had, I thought I'd kind of present, as Lars mentioned, kind of this risk analysis scenario to better guide us through to show how we can be used to solve some of these real-life risk analysis decisions, but also even business decisions as well. Okay, so today's example, as Lars mentioned, will be kind of an offshore example. We're looking at a FPSO project. The type of analysis we're doing, again, pertains to any kind of project. It could be horizontal or vertical construction. It could be onshore, offshore. It really, the scenario itself, kind of the process of a risk analysis, applies to all types of projects. And in fact, the risk calendars capability, which we're going to use today to show weather examples, how that can be applied to model weather, can again be applied in a variety of different industries. We're looking at wave height today. Other examples I've used this for has been high winds, rain over a certain amount per hour, etc. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of weather-related or other kind of probabilistic downtime examples that can be leveraged from this. So as we go through, kind of keep that in mind, think a little bit more broadly. Again, we have to kind of narrow it down and give you one example. But if you've got questions and things, feel free to end those in the question box there on the control panel, and we'll address those at the end. But today's this kind of a project and the analysis we're going to do is going to focus on one project. Again, it's an FPSO, and we're going to do a risk analysis first to kind of show you, and then we'll also talk about how it can be used in this case to decide when the team decided to look at what type of mooring system to use, how robust, how strong of a mooring system to use, they used this to help guide the decision making, right? Whether or not it was worth the added expense to go ahead and build and plan for a system to handle up to 5-meter wave height, or if it would be sufficient enough to just be able to handle 3-meter wave heights. Doesn't sound like a big difference, but in I think this kind of came out of the North Sea operations, it's actually quite substantial, as we'll see as we go through today. And actually what I thought we'd do is begin at the end and then work our way back, right? Because what we can see here is that through the process of doing this analysis, we're actually able to quantify the impacts of these different scenarios. Lars mentioned the ability to do these different kind of scenario analyses. So this is us. We've gone through, and we're going to actually re-walk through this process, but there have been 3 scenarios run. One is kind of the baseline risk scenario with all of the other risks included except for the weather risk. We want to isolate that impact. We did it once with a system that could support up to 3-meter wave heights. And what we see here is that 3-meter wave height, if we only build for 3 meters, we actually incur 25-day of delay because of the probability that the waves would exceed that, right? Whereas if we go back and say, well, let's look at a system that can handle the 5-meter wave height, what actually we see is it actually pulls the project back in. There's no further impact, right? So by planning for a more robust system, it actually counteracts the impact of the weather delays, right? So it's great on the schedule side. And then we'll see here on the cost side that basically the similar thing kind of holds true. We've got a cost-loaded schedule with some average day rates added in for on the cost impact side of things. And so what we see there is those 25 days equate to roughly $250,000. And then it basically the difference on the 5-meter wave height is negligible. It's 16,000, and that's probably just due to some other things that kind of carry through in the model, right? So this shows already the value of the ability to be able to go and not only look at the impact of risk, but then also be able to model some of these different scenarios and look at, well, what about this scenario? What happens if we do, version A versus version B? So we could isolate those impacts of those scenarios. And in addition, we're also able to go and look at cost and schedule impacts as well, right? So a lot of different things we can look at. And again, we'll go back through and do this so you can see that process. And so with that, I'm going to jump back over to Saffron Risk, all right? So many of you may be familiar with this. What we see here is I've got this opened up to our schedule tab. As I go through today and do this analysis, you'll see me walk kind of across the screen from left to right. On the left-hand side, we have a series of tabs that represent the inputs into a model. In the middle is the analysis, and on the right is the output, right? So again, process-led interface kind of follows the most rudimentary process so that it can be adapted to even the most basic or sophisticated process that you might have in terms of how to do a risk analysis. But ultimately it comes down to inputs, analysis, and outputs, right? So I've got a schedule here. This is a model. It's a few hundred activities. I've got like 324. We've got some cost loading in here to help us kind of look at schedule and cost impacts, right? So all of that's here. You can not only bring in schedules from Microsoft Project and Primavera P6, you can import those, no problem. Saffron Project, of course, we're actually using that here as our core scheduling engine, so we've got a robust 20-plus year history of planning and scheduling behind all of this, doing the analysis on the scheduling side. But you can also create schedules natively right here in Saffron Risk, right? So as you're going through early stages of project development, and oftentimes teams kind of use Excel or Project to get started to kind of build these lightweight schedules. Go ahead and build that model right here in Saffron Risk, right? Begin to build out your activities, capture your risk from the get-go, and so you'll have that information here, and you can grow over time. Right? If you happen not to be using Saffron Project, we have the ability that as you kind of build it up to a certain point and you say, well, we're using a different tool, you could export it back into one of those formats to, use it that way as well, right? So native support, you can import, you can export, not a problem to bring in different types of schedules or create one here inside of Saffron Risk. Okay, so with the schedule warnings, again, kind of a common step in risk analysis now. This has been going on for years. Again, what we're looking for here, and we have a series of checks that we pull and we look for, is that we're looking for things that impact the quality of the analysis, right? So whether that be constraints, which stop the flow of the schedule and stop the risk from being passed through the schedule, or whether that be a lag that sometimes can hide work. Right? Oftentimes I've seen people have long lags in their schedule, and they represent everything from approval processes to long lead procurement items to curing periods for concrete pours, things of that nature. All those things kind of hide work or risk that may exist in the schedule. So we want to give you a chance to identify those, pull those out, make activities out of them, and have a better quality analysis. Of course, you got to have a logically linked schedule. So if you're missing logic, again, that kind of negates some of the impact of risk, and you don't necessarily get a full view of what the impact of risk is on your schedule. Now, doesn't mean we can't handle those. Again, at our core, we're a very robust scheduling engine. We can handle all of that. It's more the quality and the impact to the analysis that we're trying to highlight for you. As you go through and do those checks, you can choose to accept them. You can write some notes as in, oh yeah, I know why that constraint is there, or I know why that lag is there, and we'll retain all that information for you as you do subsequent analyses. So a little bit more clever and smart in terms of how we track that and manage that over time. Okay, so we've got a schedule, we've looked at our schedule check, our schedule warnings, we're feeling pretty good about where we stand, and so now we want to go in and build some risk. Now, you may have noticed when I was on the schedule, I completely skipped over talking about adding 3-point estimates by percentage and doing some of these things and applying all of that uncertainty against the schedule. The reason being is that when we built Saffron Risk, we took a fundamentally different approach to how we wanted to capture the risk for a risk analysis. In the end, what that means is all types of risk, uncertainty, what's been called historically uncertainty, what's been called risk events, and now the weather or calendar risk are all captured and defined right here inside the risk register, right? So there's no need to go to multiple different places in the application to figure out, well, how do we define that risk and what is the impact of this and what's being applied? It's all right here in a kind of consolidated, integrated risk register. Okay, so really nice benefit, really easy to see. The other benefit that brings, right, because we're no longer having to keep track of kind of the percentage-based estimates we apply to activities selectively back in the schedule, we can now take those ranges and actually name them, right? So I can still apply uncertainty in the same way, but using kind of this concept of what we call like risk factors, I can now go, if we take a look at some of these risks that have been defined as 100% right here towards the bottom, right? I've actually kind of named them differently just so I can keep track of them. You can name them however you want. But we broke out some of those uncertainty ranges and named them differently, right? So we've got contracting uncertainty, engineering uncertainty, FPSO, fabrication uncertainty. So we've defined all these uncertainty ranges. I can name them and again define the impact, right? But now I've got clarity and some detail that I can use later in my output analysis, right? Also very unique. A lot of tools don't have the ability to really show you the quantified impact of uncertainty and risk in one chart. We can do that, and you'll see that here in a little bit. Additionally, if I've got a big spread, a big uncertainty range, right? Historically, I may go in and say, well, this is minus 25 plus 50. Well, that may contain multiple things inside of it. That may include just the general estimate uncertainty, productivity uncertainty, all sorts of different things may be built up inside of that one big range. I can now break that down into smaller, more discrete uncertainty or factors and apply those factors against the activity. So again, I have better clarity of what was included in the risk against that activity. Right? Just a much cleaner, much more complete way of looking at modeling risk and uncertainty. So a couple things to take note of. Here's the uncertainty range. We've now kind of decided to break things out into a relative or absolute. A relative range uses percentages, right? This has been done for a while, but what's different is, again, because we're not statically applying these to the activities, this is dynamic. This will update and will apply the correct values every time you bring in a schedule and rerun the analysis. You'll get the correct ranges applied because we'll apply these against the remaining duration. Right? So I've got relative impacts. We'll see here, we'll come back and we'll talk about these calendar ranges again. I've got the ability to go in and define absolute ranges, right? So here's one. It's an absolute impact, which means it's going to add somewhere between 4 and 21 days to this activity, right? There's a variety of distributions that we support. We've purposely been selective and not including every kind of distribution under the sun. Because the truth of the matter is we find out people don't use them, right? Really weren't being used, but in the end, if we give you access to the cumulative, right, where you can create your own distribution, you can use historical data, and you can create any kind of distribution shape that you want. So in the end, you've got full flexibility, full control, but we've got the common ones that are used most frequently to kind of, again, simplify things and make it easier to stay focused on the right things and not some of the subtle nuances of modeling, okay? So again, probability and impact, right? There's some with 20%. My uncertainty ranges have 100%. So a lot of different ways. I've got a lot of flexibility, but a lot of control over how I want to create those uncertainties and risk factors, those risk events, and also the risk calendars, the weather impacts in this example. Applying risk to the schedule, very easy through this risk mapping interface. We've got our schedule over here on the left. I'll come back and show you that I can control that view, whatever view I set on my schedule, right? Whatever grouping, layout, filters, etc. that I have set here is what I'll see for all my other screens as well. When we go back through and do the risk for the weather, I'll apply a filter and you'll see how that updates across all the screens. Okay, so for right now, I've just kind of got a normal WBS grouping, and as you look at some of these activities, you can see that across these drilling activities, we've applied multiple risk, right? So I've got the ability to pull in and apply multiple risk. I've got some relative impacts, I've got some absolute impacts. We take all those and combine them and actually give you a quick snapshot down here at the bottom of a sample distribution, a sample cumulative distribution for that activity now based on the risk that you've mapped to it, right? So in this example, here's a 35-day duration activity, which more or less will take somewhere between 30 and 116 days based on the risk that we've applied to it, right? So as you're doing your mapping and you're doing your modeling, you've got a quick little insight here into what the overall impact would be. We can do that for duration. I'm not sure and then there's some cost against this activity, so again, we'll see it for the cost side as well. Right? So for both of these, we're giving you immediate insight into, have I applied all of the risks that I was thinking of? Do those risks kind of make sense from an overall impact? Could this activity really take that long? Does that sound right? You've got those immediate insights as you go through and build your model. Okay? So from the analysis perspective, you've got the ability to choose which risk to include. I don't have these mapped right now, these two weather risks, but I'm going to go ahead and uncheck them now, just kind of for clarity's sake. Since these don't have any impacts, they haven't been mapped. All these other risks, I've got them mapped, I've got them included. So we're going to go ahead and run our analysis now, right? And again, this is just kind of our baseline risk analysis of all the risk in the project. We land on our standard distribution graph. Pretty standard output. Again, the view here is set by whatever I've got on my schedule view in terms of my activity layout. We automatically give you the option to highlight whatever percentage value you want. In this case, we've chosen the P80, pretty common. You can again, set that value. We also have the ability to highlight the delta between whatever p-value you set and your deterministic, right? So at a quick glance now, we can already see there's 131 days of impact of risk against this project schedule, right? So that's without including the weather, but at a high level, we get a quick insight into that. And then we can do the same thing for the project cost as well, too. All right. Sometimes you want to look at things in terms of duration. You can see that as well, right? So what I want to do is I'm actually going to save off my finish date and my cost distributions to a comparison chart so we can look at them later. So I'm going to save off my finish date. And again, I'm going to call this my baseline. And I'm going to go back to my distribution graph, and I'll switch over to my cost, and I'll send that over. So I'm on my cost tab now, and again, I'm just going to label that as my baseline. Okay, so I now know the overall spread and range and kind of what the impact of risk is in my schedule. The next question that always comes up is, well, why? What's driving that? So we've got two different ways we can look at that. We've got drivers, right? And this is the classic historical way of looking at things, right? This is using correlation, right? So we're measuring the strength of the relationship, the correlation between, in this case, the risk and the activities against the project finish, and then based on that correlation, we're ranking them, right? And kind of saying, hey, this is the risk that is likely to have the most impact on your project finish. What's very difficult, and is often the next common question that comes up, is how much impact is that, right? Well, this chart can't tell me that. It doesn't do the analytics that way. It's not designed to do that calculation. And so it's often very confusing and a frustrating chart to present. People like it, they know it, they look for it, but yet it doesn't give them the insight they're looking for, right? Now, there's some things I can look at. We've got the ability now, if I've got questions about what that risk is, I can click on this and it drops me back into my risk register so I can see what that risk was, how it was defined, etc., right? I can do that for the activities as well too. But ultimately, it doesn't really give me the insight I'm looking for. The best we can give you is the correlation coefficient, right, which tells you how strong that relationship is, how likely it is to be a finish, but I can't tell you anything about that. It's inaccurate and wrong to say that 63% of the impact comes from this risk. It's wrong to say that 63% of the time this risk will have an impact. It's just, you can't tell that. It's not what that number represents. So we said, you know what, let's go back to the drawing board and rethink about what's the better way to do that. So we came up with what we call the sensitivity analysis, right? So our sensitivity analysis takes the project schedule, takes all of the risk, and actually reruns the analysis multiple times. And you're seeing that go on here now. What we're actually doing is taking each risk, rerunning the analysis, and removing them one by one. When we do that, we're able to actually isolate the impact of that risk and say, when that risk is not part of the model, when it doesn't occur, how much does the project change? How much does it shift, right? So we're able to go through and do that. We can run those calculations, and then when we're done with that, we're able to rank them and give you the largest schedule and cost impact, right? Many times they're different. Your schedule impacts are not always your biggest cost impacts. Here, again, the way we built the model, a lot of our costs are kind of just day rate loaded, so it would make sense that the ones that have the largest schedule impact also have the largest cost impact, right? So if I kind of just clean this up a little bit to make it simpler, the first line I'm going to add in says none, right? And so that is if no risk are excluded, so it's all of my risks are included. And just for grins, I'll compare that against my largest impact, right? So I can see here, there's a 50-day difference, and again, roughly $500,000 difference, right? So the uncertainty around the fabrication of the SPSO, all right, it's going to cost us 50 days, right? There's 50 days of uncertainty in terms of how long it will take to do that activity, which roughly translates into $500,000, right? In this example, right? And I can see that by all of my activities here below, or all my risk here below, right? So a really great way, unique quantified insight into what is the schedule and cost impact of a risk, right? Gives me a way to really understand what that impact is. In this example, there are a lot of similarities between this list of risk and my overall sensitivity analysis. In some cases these are different. This rework is a little bit higher. Some things are sorted differently. And we've noticed that in quite a few models, that while there may be some similarities between my drivers and my sensitivity, many times the sensitivity analysis reports something different. But it actually ends up being potentially more accurate because it's extracting out that risk. And so you actually say, yeah, if that risk doesn't occur, this is what the project will look like. Here's how much risk or uncertainty is left, right? So really great insight, really unique in terms of trying to understand what the impact of an individual risk is against the project. So, and again, I'm going to stop here at the baseline again, just this distribution comparison. We're going to build this chart up. This was a chart that we started with. And so now we're going to go back through. I've done my baseline analysis. I've seen what the overall spread is on my project. I have an idea of what's driving it from an overall risk perspective. But now let's look at that decision to make about, what's the cost-benefit analysis around the type of mooring system. Is it worth it? And so we'll go back now I'll show you how you can create a risk calendar really easily. We'll take a look at that, and then we'll plug a couple of those things in. We'll do a quick analysis to build this chart up, and then take a look at the end there and kind of summarize what we've done. Okay, so let's go back first and talk about the risk calendars, right? So what we've done is we've built the ability in to create these risk calendars, right? And so again, the examples we're using are weather, which is kind of most often how they're used, but it can be used for other things. A few years ago, I worked on a turnaround project where they actually wanted to model, there was always a problem of whether or not contract labor would show up, overall productivity of the labor, and so we're trying to use, again, similar concept of being able to use probabilistic downtime, right? I'm assuming I'm going to get 8 or 12 hours of working time a day, but if the guys don't show up, or the transport buses are running late, or my productivity is less, I'm not going to get that kind of productivity. I'm going to have some effectively downtime. I'm only going to get 10 hours of productivity out of a crew. And so we use calendars in that way to kind of capture that downtime as well, right? So it's not just weather, you can capture some other things as well. What's really unique about the way we've approached this is we've allowed you not only to create them from a template, right? So the template approach allows you to go in, pick a month and say, okay, in this month, these days look like this. And you can basically create the same kind of information manually by just doing it using your own experience and your own expertise. The other way we have in terms of doing it from time series, right? So we talk about with time series. Well, when we ship version 1.5, in the installation directory, there's a sample file. It's this exact file here. It's a sample file that we've gotten permission to distribute to you, so you can take a look at how it works. But what we've done, right, so you can see here, this is data going back to 2005, and I think it goes, I forget exactly how many years it goes, but it's quite a bit of data that we've got here. And basically it's at 3-hour intervals, right? So this is from a weather service that tracked what the current weather conditions were in terms of wind speed, wave height, and some other things, every day for every 3-hour period over time. To translate that and use that, right, you basically just kind of have to decide. And so in this example, we were saying, this is a 5-meter wave height, or, you can kind of come up with some different sets of data, but you can determine, based on those weather conditions, is this a working period or a non-working period, right? So the non-working period is a 1, which means there's bad weather. The working period is a 0, so there's good weather. So you can see here a lot of non-working and a few working periods here, etc. You take that data, all right, and when you come here and generate from time series, you can drop that data in. You just copy and paste it, and in the end, we create these calendars. Right? So really easy way to go take data that many times already exists in your companies, you're already paying for it for a variety of different reasons, right? Now you can take that data, use that to capture and look for patterns of working and non-working periods, document that, plug it in here, and it will create these calendars, right? The dark blue areas represent, in this case, 100% downtime, and you can see the lighter blue areas just have a little bit less downtime. Right? So we'll compare, this is how often the wave height exceeds 3 meters, right? Which is pretty frequent for a lot of the kind of fall and winter months, and then some of the spring months, right? Versus how often it exceeds 5 meters, right? So a lot less frequent, right? Little different look, it's in different months, right? So the weather data shows us some different patterns, right? But that's our key input into how often does this happen, right? So we're going to go first and take a look. We'll use this 3-meter wave height calendar. We'll apply that to a key activity, a mooring activity, where to apply that risk to. We'll run the analysis. We'll see the delta, and then we'll go back and we'll apply the 5-meter calendar and do it again, right? So I've got my risk calendars defined. Again, I'm going to go ahead and take my schedule, and to make things a little bit easier to find the activities, since I got a few hundred activities, I'm going to filter down to just my mooring activities. And so you can see here, it shortened my list. That's pretty easy. When I go over to my project risk, again, we can take a look. So what we've done here, I've gone and created a risk called weather delays due to mooring. Here's my 3-meter. I've defined it as a calendar risk, and I selected my 3-meter calendar, right? So again, there's that same visual representation showing me now at a monthly level, right? So we kind of give you a snapshot view of it. what the impact would be, or what the probability of downtime is for that, right? So again, once again, a single view of all of my risk. I've got a definition of what that risk looks like. To go in and apply the mapping, I'm going to my mapping tab. Again, that filtered view shows up. And there it is. All right, there's my 3-meter wave height applied to my schedule. All right, so I've mapped that to this mooring hookup activity. When I want to go and run my analysis, I make sure that I include it, right? So now I've defined the risk, I've defined my calendar, I've defined a risk and said this risk uses that calendar. I've mapped that risk like I do every other risk to a selected activity. And again, in my case, I want to make sure I have that included in my analysis. And I run the analysis. And we get our results, right? And if you remember, already this view is different. That same filter view shows up here. Again, right, I said before, if I apply a filter or a certain set of grouping, I'll see that everywhere else across my screens. And so again, already I've got some indication that, yep, that 3-meter wave height, if we only support that, will cause us some problems, cause us some delays. I'm going to go ahead and send my finish date to the comparison. I'm going to rename that my 3-meter height. I'm going to go back and also grab that same cost, right? So I can do my cost-benefit analysis. I want to send that across. All right, and so today we're looking at like 3 scenarios. There's no limit to the number of scenarios or comparisons that you can do, right? You got a lot of flexibility in how many you can do. Okay, but already, right, much than we saw in kind of that earlier chart, those first screenshots when we first started, there it is. There's that if I only use the mooring system that can support up to 3-meter wave heights, I will add 25 days of delay just due to that same risk, right? So the risk of exceeding those wave heights will actually cost us some delays, and again, also cost us some additional dollars. Okay, so just focusing on this scenario, I'm now going to go back and swap out the calendars. I'm going to map the 5-meter risk and include that in my analysis and rerun it. And it's really that simple to run some of these different scenarios to compare and contrast kind of different options, different decisions, the impacts of different risk, right? It's really just kind of a quick, simple process. So again, if I go back to my project risk, again, there's the 5-meter. It's already been defined, already set up for me. Again, it was pretty easy. I just go in and pick out which calendar I want to use. I'm going to use the 5-meter wave height. For my risk mapping, I will just unmap the 3-meter. I'll apply the 5-meter risk, right? So I've got 2 different, the ability to map different risk against them and see what the impact is. When I do the analysis, I'll make sure to include my 5-meter, not my 3-meter. I'll rerun the analysis. And I'll just push back on the finish date here, right? So again, there's that same number 131. I'm going to send that to the comparison. This is now my 5-meter system. And I'll go back to my distribution graph, look at my cost, and I'll send that across. And that becomes that, right? Now, what you really can't see is these 2 lines are overlaid. So the green represents my 5 system. If I turn that off, you can see the blue line behind it, which was kind of that baseline, right? So in this scenario, from a schedule perspective, if we use the system that can tolerate up to 5-meter in wave height, there basically becomes virtually no schedule impact, right? So even though I've got risks that impact the schedule and push it out into different time periods, if I plan and kind of basically mitigate the impact of all these other risks happening and mitigate the chance and the probability that we might get pushed into an inclement weather period by selecting a more robust mooring system, I can negate the impact of those other risks or the impact of the weather risk by choosing that type of system, right? So again, really good insight from a schedule perspective. And then again, on the cost side, virtually negligible. You can see here there's a little bit of difference. Again, that's just kind of from the simulation possibilities and different things taking a little bit longer. There's probably some minor pushes on some other activities that cost it to cost a little bit more, right? But again, they're virtually identical, virtually overlaying each other in terms of the cost perspective, right? So again, if we take a look back at what we've done, right? So we started with our schedule. right? And again, schedule can be imported, it can be built here, but you can take a schedule, cost load it, you can go through, review those schedule impacts, map the risk. Again, I can't really express enough how much our existing customers and people have really given us great feedback about the idea of saying, yeah, it makes it really easy, particularly in a workshop kind of environment where you want to know, have we captured this risk? Have we defined this? You've got one stop. You've got one place to go, the Project Risk tab, to see what are all the risks we've defined, right? Have we captured them all adequately? And you can capture your uncertainty, your risk events, and your weather all in one place. You can then choose which risk you want to map, right, and what the impacts of those are. And again, kind of a large schedule here, but if I jump down to some of these activities, we can see what the mappings are. We can see at a glance what the impact of those activities are, impacts of those risks are on the activities, and review the overall distribution, right? Really easy to go through, run the analysis, understand the impacts, capture them, and then move them over to the distribution comparison for comparison. All right, and then we have that great view of the sensitivity analysis here that really helps us quantify the impacts of those individual risks. Right, it's key insight that we just don't get from this kind of legacy view here with the drivers. No, it's a classic, much beloved in the industry, but really this is the answer people have been asking us for, which is, how do I quantify that? How do I quantify the schedule and cost? This is what we've come up with, and it's been really great, beneficial to the customers that we've been working with so far. So with that, hopefully as we've been going through, you've been popping some questions in the dialog box there. I know Lars has a few kind of summary comments there at the end, so we'll give a chance. I'm going to hand it back over to Lars. He'll go through, have a few more comments, and then we'll get to your questions. So thanks again for joining us.
Perfect. Thanks, Wes. Really appreciate that. So let me give you a quick summary of some of the things we saw here. From a user interface perspective, as you've seen, we've placed quite a bit of time and effort into our intuitive and process-led user interface, where we've used kind of the simple notion of inputs on the left, outputs on the right, and this is intended to be make this easy to use and improve basically the application of this type of software out in the industry. Second is best-in-class reporting. Reporting has been really important for us. We've spent a lot of time interviewing people, discussing with experts, and coming up with these reports. And you'll find the standard reports that you're used to seeing, plus the sensitivity analysis and a few others that we didn't show today. And then I want to just remind you that we have a built-in scheduler in Saffron Risk, which allows you to do kind of a review, analyze, iterative process, which is typically done in risk workshops very easily. And then we also have the risk readiness schedule check, which allows you to quality control your plans, make sure they're risk ready and fit for purpose for this type of use. And then we have the risk calendars that Wes just showed you, which is based on an innovative approach here, which allows you to use time series data directly into the model here. And finally, I want to mention one thing that wasn't brought up earlier, which is the ability to do risk analysis to the minute level. This is something a few customers have asked us for, especially in verticals such as transportation. You frequently find shutdowns, for example, that are very compressed in time, maybe over a weekend, and they have to do analysis to the minute level there, and that may apply in other industries as well, and we can do that in Saffron Risk. So with that, that's an overview of the kind of benefits that we bring. At this point, I want to turn over to questions, and I'm going to allow Wes to field those. So if you're ready, Wes.
Yep. Let me go ahead and I'll get a couple questions come in there during the last few minutes there. So question about, does the new version have the ability to paste a list of risks from a risk register into the Saffron program having to retype them? Yes, so we didn't cover all of the features of the new features of the latest release, but I will mention a few others. So yes, a couple things we've done is copying and pasting risk to make it easier to kind of, we know people are still using Excel versus that's probably the most common tool that risk register is built in. So it's easy to copy and paste the risk definition in. Additionally, you can now import and export risk registers as well too, right? So if you export kind of the template from Saffron, you can add to it and build it up and then import it back in. Makes it easy to move them between projects or kind of combine risk registers. A lot of things you can do there. Some of the other benefits, by the way, since we have a second, I'll just kind of talk about those. So we talked about risk calendars. We also now do resource leveling as part of the risk analysis. So that's something you can turn on under the analysis options, which says, as I run the analysis, apply resource leveling, and so we'll re-level it so you can see, if there's a resource you're trying to schedule against, whether it be a key labor resource or something like a rig or whatever it might be, we could take that into account as we do that. Lars mentioned the minute level risk analysis. Seen a big value in that in some of the transportation industries, like rail, for instance, or in cases where there's narrow or tight windows for project work to be done. Having that minute level scheduling and analysis capability helps you really just have more accuracy in your results and better understand the impacts and just better visibility. And then, of course, there were lots of little things that you may have seen. Some of them I kind of even forget, like the links. Like basically, everywhere we go now, the activities and the risk are all linked. So you can jump back to the risk register, or you can jump back to the schedule activities themselves. Okay.
That's quite a few questions popping in here. So
yeah, I'm just going to have to catch up now because a whole bunch more came in. Is there a demo to download? Yes, you can go to our website. Saffron.com is the website, really easy to get to. There's a 30-day eval you can download there. So yes, we have a 30-day eval available for that. So standalone installation or server installation, yes, both. You have the ability to install it on a desktop, and if it does, behind the scenes, right? So even in our desktop installation, we're still using a database to store all of the information. That's kind of what makes us unique from other tools, is that capability. So if you do a desktop installation, we'll install a little small Microsoft server to run all the data and capture it all, or you have the option during installation to point it to a SQL Server database that you may have on your network already, and so then you can have centralized control and all this information being stored centrally. Let's see, trying to read through, some of them are kind of long. Okay. So a question around what kinds of risk are incorporated in the software and how do you quantify their specific impact? So not sure exactly where we're going with that question, but I will say this. So we cover kind of all different types of risk, from allowing you to define them how you need, right? So uncertainty, which is a type of risk, can be captured in a variety of different ways. Risk events, those with less of 100% probability and impact, can be captured as well as the weather risk. So those different types of risk can all be captured. Choosing the best way to model kind of a risk you may have defined in your risk register is ultimately part of kind of the team's best practice. It's something we can also help you with as well, to help you figure out what's the right technique or way to apply that. So hopefully that kind of answers and addresses that question. How can we add risk events to the schedule? So interesting question. So again, you model risk events. If it's truly a risk, you can model that in the risk register. If you've got a case where you think there may be an activity that may or may not occur, you can do that. There's a way we can model existence risk, right? So there's an activity, for instance, like a review period or an approval that you're not certain you may have to do. If that's built into the schedule, you could actually create an opportunity that would eliminate that activity from the schedule in that regard. So there's a few different ways, again, that can be addressed. There's also scheduling, some things on the scheduling side we can do as well. A question regarding entering risk at the WBS level. Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because it was kind of something I glazed over there on the risk mapping side. So the way we've defined the risk allows you to handle schedules of any varying size. So we've seen a general trend in the industry that schedules have gotten a little bit smaller. Most people we've been talking to recently have really kind of had schedules in the low thousands. However, we've still seen the schedules that get to the 10s, 20s, 30,000s of activities. In either case, the way we approached it knowing that was going to be the case, that some schedules were small and some schedules were large. Those that are familiar with doing a risk analysis know that on large schedules, because of the level of detail, you run into the chance that you're going to have central limit theorem impacts, right? So the way we've defined the risk and the uncertainty is behind the scenes, we're handling correlation of the impacts. So if I have a very large schedule, I can roll it up to a level 2, a level 3, whatever level is appropriate to effectively run my risk analysis or map my risk on a summary level schedule without having to recreate the schedule, right? So yes, I can map risk to a WBS, and again, that can apply to like a construction set of activities, right? Here's my uncertainty around construction. We handle the correlation of those impacts to make sure that the input you put in is the input that gets out, and to handle those larger scales, level of details. What makes it different from other competitive software? Interesting question. I think quite a bit. As you can see here, modern tool set, right? Really taking a different approach in terms of how we've approached solving the problem of doing a schedule risk analysis. Process-led interface in terms of just the ease of use and navigation of being able to pick up the software and know where everything is. Again, inputs, analysis, and outputs. The consolidated or kind of centralized risk register where all risks are modeled in one place, and so you're not having to look around in different parts of the tool to find out, if you've mapped a risk the right way or created a risk somewhere. All that information is captured in one place. The sensitivity analysis by exclusion, really unique kind of approach in terms of how to solve that, and really gives people the information they're looking for, right? Ultimately, it comes down to what's the impact of risk on my schedule? That's the distribution graph. And of those risks, which ones have the greatest cost and schedule impact? And if I potentially can't manage everything, how do I know which ones to manage, right? And that goes back in, that's where we do that sensitivity analysis to give you that keen insight. The fact that we're behind the scenes driven by an enterprise-based scheduling tool and we save all this information off into a database makes it really easy to capture and store these results over time, to do not only trending of an individual project and its overall risk performance, but also capturing information about the risks that are being defined and how they're being defined across all the projects. Just really can't do that with a file-based system, which is what a lot of the other tools are. So definitely a lot of improvements over some of the other tools that have been in the market. So question around correlation. Given the time we had today, I had to skip over a couple of details. There is an entire correlation tab that we have in the application which allows us, as I define risks, to correlate those risks against each other, right? So for instance, there may be a case where I know that if risk A happens, risk B almost always happens as well, right? That's positive correlation. I can link that in the model. I can also say that, well, if risk A happens, I know that risk B will never happen, all right? So I can handle that through correlation as well and apply negative correlation so that if A happens, B doesn't happen, right? We can handle all of that. So the correlation between risk can all be done in the correlation tab as part of the larger risk correlation matrix. We do offer training and support. There's a 2-day training class that we offer, so you can contact us for more details about that and support. There's also phone and email support as well. And again, information regarding that, we have a most people like the email support. It's really easy. Drop us an email. We can answer your question that way, or you can pick up the phone and give us a call.
We're also posting quite a few videos on YouTube, and we're going to continue doing that to give people the ability to kind of do some self-education on various topics.
Yeah, also a good point as well. Probably have time for one last question, or are we good for a couple more?
I think we can do one or two more.
Okay. So a question regarding Saffron Project, and it's, we mentioned Saffron Project was part of this. What we did, Saffron Risk is based on the Saffron Project scheduling engine, and so there is a version of Saffron Project that comes included with Saffron Risk. We do have the ability to not only you can purchase Saffron Project independently and use it as a planning and scheduling tool, or two, if you do that, that would also give you the full planning and scheduling capabilities inside of Saffron Risk. And so in that case, you've got the benefits of the full enterprise scheduling engine as well as the kind of the risk piece around it as well. And so then you have one unified tool set to operate and work within. Related to that, so must the Saffron project files remain in the program? So we store everything in the database. All the projects are by natively are stored in the database. They can all be exported, right? So the projects themselves can be exported, and you can save them as a Saffron project file, which can then be shared and opened by other tools as well as Saffron Project and Saffron Risk. As well as the risk register. The risk register, again, that common format of Excel, we export to Excel so that it can be shared that way. It seems to be kind of the common format that people like to share risk registers in. So you can export both the project and the risk register for sharing, distribution, or other means of collaboration if it's not possible to collaborate within the tool itself.
I think we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I realize there's a few questions in here that we haven't answered, and a few of these are maybe a bit longer or very specific. So we'll get back to the people that asked those questions individually after the webinar, probably in the next few days. So expect to hear from us. So unless you have any final comments there, Wes, I think we'll kind of round off.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And there's a question that came in around, we will be making a recording of this available. Is that correct, Lars?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the recording will be sent out in 1 or 2 days. There will be a link that you can just access and view this on YouTube.
Yeah, and we'll have a link to that posted on our website as well, too.
Yes. So just before we adjourn, I wanted to mention that 2 things, actually. We have a new webinar on Saffron Project 7 coming up. Which is the scheduling engine that's built into Saffron Risk. The full Project 7 is going to be featured in a webinar on February 11th. And then finally, I want to also mention that we have recently created a user group for Saffron Risk on LinkedIn. So if you go to LinkedIn and search for Saffron Risk user group, you can join a community of users there and ask questions and get advice, and that's moderated by one of our partners, Eurolog. So I think that's it for today. If you have any further questions that we haven't answered, please reach out. We can be reached at sales@saffron.com, and you can also go to our website, and again, we'll respond to the questions that we didn't get to today individually. So thank you very much for participating. Really enjoyed the hour, and thank you very much, and have a great day.